Dear friends, today we're going to do something special. We're going to talk about censorship in Sweden, not just in general, but censorship with respect to the PCR test, which I continue to believe is the cornerstone for bringing down the people who have brought us this pandemic. We will be talking to Björn Hammarskjöld, who has been interviewed by me a number of times, and to Jesper Johansson, who is a mainstream, or was, I'm not sure, Jesper, but you'll tell us about it, mainstream journalist. So what is the backdrop to all of this? Björn, you are a renowned scientist in Sweden. You, for quite some time, of course, have been aware of the fact that PCR tests, just like Kari Mullis has always said, cannot tell you anything about infections. Can you please tell our viewers again who you are, and that you're not just someone who kind of fell off the wagon and then came up with the idea that PCR tests don't work?
Yes. I had a PhD degree in biochemistry at Stockholm University in 1971. And then I started medical studies and became a pediatrician. And in 88 and 89, I was doing some kind of sabbatical from my duty as a pediatrician, and worked as a molecular biologist in Buffalo, USA, at the State University of New York in microbiology department, and was working with HIV envelope protein using shuttle vectors and a lot of the other stuff. My PhD was I was working at the Karolinska Institute Department of Virology with measles virus, growing my measles virus, and looking at the virus particle, the nucleocapsid, and the RNA. So I knew quite a lot about the nucleo of RNA, DNA, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Are you, with that background, are you aware of, and maybe have you even been in touch with our friend and your colleague, Dr. James Thorpe from Florida in the United States?
No, I haven't. No, I haven't met him.
He gave us some very, very, very scary data with respect to the effects of the so-called vaccinations on well, it actually sterilizes women. It caused a lot of stillbirths, etc. That's his assessment, and it's absolutely alarming. And the basis for all of this has always been only one thing, and that's the PCR test, because without the PCR test, there wouldn't have been any cases. So what happened, Jesper? How did you come to understand and know that this is an important topic? And did you do an interview with Björn, and what happened?
Yes, I have. I can tell you a little bit about my background as well. Before I started to work as a full-time journalist, I was working as a biomedical technician. Mm-hmm. And I was working in a molecular genetic laboratory for 10 years. Where I was working with PCR technology. So this was something I was very familiar with from the beginning. And so when this corona so-called pandemic happened, and I got to know that they were supposed to diagnose these COVID patients through a PCR test, I was very surprised. And of course, I saw that there's something fishy about this, of course. Back then, I started my career as a journalist in 2019 because my full-time career as a journalist. Before that, I've been doing documentaries and stuff. But in 2019, I decided to go full-time as a journalist. Mm-hmm. And I entered the free media in Sweden because I wanted to have some sort of journalistic freedom. to work with. And at the time, I started working in a newspaper, and I was happy enough to be able to go to actually the real press conferences that was held by the Swedish health authorities. And in early April 2020, I asked our state epidemiologist, Anders Tegnell, about the PCR tests. And I asked for proofs that this was an scientifically well studied and well, how do you say, suitable way to diagnose people. And actually he gave the answer that, well, this is something that is being used all over the world. So I don't think there's any reason to doubt that this is the case. And then I pushed again with the same question, and he said, well, I have to come back and ask and tell you what the scientific foundation for this is. And yes, so that's the story about that. And in 2000, I then worked with several different persons and companies within the free media as a freelance journalist. And in 2022, I started to work in this web TV, the biggest Swedish free television.
So you are, when you started to work as a full-time as a journalist, you had become something of a scientific journalist, right? With this scientific background that you have.
Well, yeah, it happened to be that this pandemic came and I had that background. So more or less, yeah, but I'm pretty broad. I mean, I have an interest in various amounts of topics in different questions. So, but yeah, this was, I guess I was pretty suited to be a journalist during this period. Because
I had no idea, yes, but that explains why you were able to write about this and to even do documentaries about it. Because if you don't have the scientific background, I would imagine that it's kind of hard to do. In my case, I'm a lawyer. I mean, I do have a background as a medical and in medical and pharmaceutical law, but I still am dependent on experts' evidence in order to make the right choices, in order to do a legal analysis. And when I first saw the videos that Kari Mullis had done, explaining over and over and over again that a PCR test cannot be used for diagnostic purposes. In fact, it was never authorized for diagnostic purposes. That's when I dug deeper. Now, what I found extremely interesting is that in one of those first press conferences, I think it was in April of 2020 maybe, you spoke with and questioned Anders Tegnell, because he's a he was back then, I don't know where he went, he seems to have disappeared, but for the resistance, for those of us who have always been critical of what's going on, he was a kind of a hero. And even he did not know that the PCR test cannot be used for scientific purposes. He had to read up on this and do some more research. That's what he admitted?
Yes, that was what he admitted to me. And just a couple of months later, this paper came from the Swedish health authorities, where they said that this was actually, the PCR method was actually not suitable for diagnosis of COVID-19, but he didn't know at the time when I asked the question.
Did he ever answer, when he must have seen that paper as well, did he ever give you an answer to your question after or maybe did you bring this to his attention?
Well, the other times I spoke to him, I didn't brought this question to him again. I had other topics back then. Okay.
And how did you get it out into the open? I mean, to me, when I learned about the fact that the PCR test cannot be used for diagnostic purposes, this is in August or September of 2020, through a number of interviews we did with virologists, immunologists, epidemiologists, biologists like Dr. Mike Yeadon, Professor Dolores Cahill, Professor Capel, etc., etc. For me, it was just stunning because it was so obvious that everything was based on the PCR test. every single measure, the mask mandates, social distancing, the lockdowns, eventually even the so-called vaccinations, everything was based on it. So you knew much more than I did, because you were aware of what the PCR test can and cannot do before I became aware of it. So when you realized what they were doing, is that why you got in touch with Björn, so that you would have a scientist who you could interview, who would then speak out to the general public?
Well, I got in contact with Björn like 1.5 years later on, when I decided to do my best to try and get this message out for real, for once and all. But before that happened, just a few weeks after that they announced this pandemic, I also brought to light that there was that the Anthony Fauci in US, that he actually knew that there was no high numbers of deaths related to COVID, only like a severe flu. And he wrote this in a New England Journal of Medicine, a paper called Navigating the Uncharted. And I brought that to light also, and tried to bring another perspective. But when it comes to the PCR tests, this was in December of 2022. And this was at the time when I had been working in Sweb TV for, well, since March of that year, full time as an employee. And I knew Björn since before. I know he's a very competent man. And as he presented in his presentation here, he has a PhD and he's a pediatric. So I thought he would be the perfect man to respond to this information that I had dug up. And when I was working as a journalist trying to expose the problems with the PCR tests, I gave some calls to the Swedish health authorities. Among other people, I spoke to the chief lawyer for the health authority in Sweden, Bitte Bråstad, and also the chief of the microbiology section. They were a part of making the rules, or how do you say that? Yeah, the rules and the guidelines for how the laboratories should behave in regards to the COVID-19 story. So I got their answers. I telephone interviewed them, and I was told by my employee, my boss at work, that I should have a reliable person to give his comment on these things that they told us from the health authorities. And I thought that Björn was the perfect man to do that. So I contacted Björn and we did the interview. But unfortunately, it didn't come out.
Now, to give some perspective on why this is so important, it's not just important because of the lockdowns many small and medium-sized businesses went under. It is not just important because people had to wear masks. That is important, yes. But the real important comes when you look at the justification for the so-called vaccination campaign, because that too is based on the PCR test and the cases that they created by way of deliberately misusing the PCR test in order to get people to get the shots. Very recently, we did an interview with retired Professor Denis Rancourt from Canada. He's a physicist, and he has been looking at the statistics very closely. He's probably the man with the most knowledge as far as the mortality statistics are concerned. And just like Mike Yeadon, Jay Cooey, Sonia Pekova, Klaus Steger, and all the others have said there was no excess mortality before the start of the vaccination campaign. None whatsoever. Yeah, there were spikes in Bergamo and in New York, but this is all, as we now know and can show and will show in a court of law, due to deliberate medical malpractice as ordered through the Fauci protocols. But here's one of the statistics that we got from Denis Rancourt. In the fall of 2021, this is obviously after the start of the vaccination campaign, life insurance companies in the United States noticed that there was a 40% increase among in deaths, so that there's a higher demand for what the life insurances had insured. Another thing is, and that's really important, there was an 84% increase in deaths in excess mortality in the age bracket of the 20 to 40 or 44-year-olds. 84% increase. We can see this, not just the life insurance companies saw this, but we can see it in the real estate markets that are also going down now because there's less demand. So that's why it's so important, not just because it was illegal and fabricated the PCR test as a basis for the lockdowns, but also for the killings. This is not just accidental killings, this is deliberate killings. That's why it's so important, and that's why it's so important to shine a light on those who try to keep this from the general public. So what happened when you and Björn got together and tried to publish this?
Yeah, and may I just add one thing? And when we speak about the statistics in northern Italy, it was also known that several of these statistics, about 99% of the people that died and said to have died from COVID, they had other comorbidities, and they were often very old, above 70 years of age. So the statistics has been manipulated in order to get this narrative running. Yeah, and sorry, your question about how we got it going, the interview?
Yeah, how did you, what happened when you interviewed Björn? What did he say? Did he confirm? Of course you did, this is a rhetorical question, but of course he confirmed that PCR tests are not suited and not even authorized for diagnostic purposes. So this might have been a bombshell interview, and then you weren't able to publish it, right?
Yeah, and it was pretty much more than just an interview, because as I said before, it was pretty long interviews I've had done with high-ranked persons from the Swedish health authorities. And this was, well, unfortunately, it was censored in that way that during one segment of this 2-hour-long interview that we did, it was split apart in 2 parts. So we had part 1 in 1 hour and part 2 in 1 hour. And in one of these 2 segments, Björn said something that my colleagues thought was controversial, and it was about some nanotechnology within the vials. Mm-hmm. And it was just a short couple of seconds, and I didn't have any follow-up question about it because it wasn't really a part of our discussion. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, because of this, the boss decided to discard the entire interview, both parts. So all of my work was, it didn't get published, unfortunately.
But that's a very lame excuse. He might have just asked you to edit the interview and maybe delete that part which he thought was controversial or polarizing. That would have been a better way of going about it, wouldn't it?
It would have been a better way of going about it. And actually, when you say that I could have edited, yeah, I actually did. I actually stopped my holiday. This mm-hmm. was the day before New Year's Eve. Mm-hmm. And I got a mail from Björn saying that, well, we did this interview in the beginning of December. And now when we go into the year 2023, we will have a new law that will be able to label you as a terrorist if you put out information that goes against the state in certain topics. You will be able to be put in jail if you're a whistleblower.
Oh, and that means you can be qualified to be a terrorist if you expose the terrorists who are killing people, right?
More or less, yes. Mm-hmm. And of course, Björn was not interested in being put to jail just for telling the truth. Mm-hmm. So I did my best to take a break from my holiday and go to work and edit this 2-hour part interview that we did. And well, my boss came into the office that same evening, and he told me that we shouldn't publish it, unfortunately.
What did you have any say in this, Björn? Did they ever approach you, or were they only going through Jesper? Did you have a chance to maybe talk to them and set the record straight, or explain to them, hey, look, this is all verifiable evidence that I'm giving you?
Well, we tried to persuade the owner of the channel, but he refused.
Did they ever explain why? Did they say, well, we're with the deep state, or no explanation whatsoever?
No.
Well, what happened after this, Jesper? Did you, I mean, this is very clear. This is a very clear signal. It means that unlike what most of our constitutions say, that there's freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of science, of course, all of a sudden you run into a wall. You cannot publish anything with respect to the PCR test, no matter if it's true or not. You just cannot publish it. Did you continue to?
Sorry, I have to correct you. Actually, Sweb TV did some things about the PCR test, but it was not as big as this thing was, with a lot of interviews from the Swedish health authorities and commenting by Björn.
Okay.
So there were some topics about it, actually.
Okay. Are you still working for them or with them, or what happened in the aftermath?
No, I lost my job in the end of March. I was working as a news editor, so I was responsible for the TV broadcasts for three times a week, and the thing was that I was learning more and more day by day, and not only being in contact with our two reporters doing their work and organizing that, in the end I was also able to go out while coordinating the work with the other ones. I was able to go out and do my own video recordings and come back and put everything together on time. But unfortunately, I was told that I was too expensive to have as an employee, and I had 1 month to 1 month's notice before I had to quit my job as a journalist there. And and I was told this on a Friday, and when I came back to work on Monday, I was told that I actually could leave straight away. So I thought, well, I have a lot of project left to do. I mean, I did one interview about a man whose child, a 13-year-old child, was vaccinated with this so-called corona vaccine. Later, this poor boy died after he stayed in 70 plus days in the hospital. And it was a very, well, emotional interview, of course, to do. And I had another interview, a big interview with an Irish professor when it came to the subject of declining births in Europe. And we were going through the statistics of how many stillbirths and how many miscarriages there have been in Europe, in different nations, and they all seem to correlate. Like the miscarriages and the stillbirths, they started 9 months after the injections of these persons. So we did an interview also, the same as with Björn. We did a 2-hour interview and split it up in 2 parts. But when I got the message that I was gonna go from work at the same day, on the Monday, then I asked, like, okay, so what about this project? Am I not gonna finish this so you can get him out. And he was like, no, you don't need to, you can go now. So yeah.
Were you able to take these projects to your next place of work and continue working on them?
Unfortunately not, because my mail account was blocked. So I didn't have access to like mails that I have sent and to the authorities that I could have used, you know, in other projects and to continue my career as a journalist. But I couldn't, unfortunately. And that's a shame, because there was a lot of things that I had done, several longer interviews on several different topics that could have been used, but they were never appreciated in that way, that they could have been a program of their own. Although I think that the public would have enjoyed hearing me, doing some calls to persons in authority positions in Sweden. So unfortunately not.
Both of these topics, the ones that you just mentioned that you couldn't continue to work on, the father of the 13-year-old boy who probably died as a result of the so-called vaccination, and the other dealing with the statistics on declining birth exactly 9 months after the beginning of the so-called vaccination campaign. Both of these topics are of public relevance, obviously, because it could very well indicate that there's something not right with the so-called vaccines. And if you don't let the public know, but rather allow the official narrative to continue persuading more and more people to get a potentially highly toxic and dangerous vaccine, that is something that someone will have to be held accountable for. So why do you think, did you ever get an explanation, or why do you think they stopped your reporting, first shutting down your interview with Björn and then stopping your other projects you just spoke about? What was the reason for that?
There might have been some personal reasons behind it, personal chemistry. I don't know. Well, I got the official explanation, as I said, was because of money, but that doesn't explain why you don't give out the interviews.
No.
So I think I've seen after I quit that they actually touch upon these topics, such as the declining birth rates of the nations of Europe. So I think that it was personal, because I'm a guy that really, I'm a passionate man when it comes to the truth. And sometimes maybe if I don't feel that I get that people trust in my ability to do a good job, I can become even more focused when I perhaps should take a step back and just like, okay, this is what you say. Okay, I will tone down my passion about this. So maybe that has affected. I don't know. I mean, I think actually we should ask the one who is deciding in Web TV to be absolute sure about what this is actually really about. So I can just speculate, and maybe it is something personal.
Björn, did you ever get a chance to get this message out to the Swedish public, the message about the PCR test? Did you ever have a chance to do this in another interview, maybe?
No, but what I have is a blog where I have published some stuff about the PCR test and other things during these times. And the PCR test, they are just awful. We don't know anything about what we are testing, because the probe sequence is not published. We don't know what we are testing. It could be anything. because you just need a stretch of 25 to 30 nucleotides to identify a person or an organism or a protein or whatever. Because when you have 4 nucleotides and 3 letters in a word, making an amino acid, defining an amino acid in a sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you exchange just one of those 3 bases, you get another amino acid out.
Mm-hmm.
Not always, but usually you get another. That means that the protein that is made is bending in another way. So it doesn't look the same, it doesn't work the same. Usually the enzymes and things like that just stop working.
Mm-hmm.
So so the DNA sequence or RNA sequence is really of importance. And that is classified information. You can't get that information. So we don't know what the PCR tests are testing.
That's my suspicion as well. Well, we know that a PCR test cannot distinguish between, this is layman's speak, of course, dead and live matter. That's important because if you test positive, it may very well be the result of your own immune system having successfully fought a common cold or the flu 3 or 4 months ago. And the other reason is that PCR tests will never find a whole virus because whatever is taken from the swabs and put into the machine is destroyed, it's mushed. So it'll always be just fragments of a virus. Now, Dr. Mike Yeadon told us that there are 4 endemic coronaviruses that have been around at least since the 1960s, probably much longer, but they were discovered in the 1960s. The PCR test is not specific. So whatever it tests positive to, I mean, number one, this indicates that it is almost guaranteed that you find something or that you test positive if this test is applied, because the coronavirus or one of the 4 coronaviruses, you've got to have run into it at some through some previous cold or infection with the cold or the flu. And number 2, it cannot even tell which one of the 4 coronaviruses it has found. It cannot tell what this coronavirus does. So ultimately, it is absolutely, this is the conclusion that I have come to, absolutely useless to apply a PCR test in order to find out if somebody is infected or not. And the final confirmation for this, my assumption, came with the mortality statistics that were shown to us by Denis Rancourt. Because if this had been a dangerous novel coronavirus and not just a pack of lies, there must have been excess mortality before the start of the vaccination campaign, but there wasn't. So that to me is the clearest sign that this is one gigantic fraud. And we know it's not negligence. There wasn't any mistakes that were made. We know this because of the way that it was applied, because of the 2 whistleblowers from the World Health Organization, Dr. Astrid Stuckelberger and Sylvia Barron. And we know that the one person who was in charge of inventing this particular PCR test, Professor Dr. Drosten of Charité University, is a liar. He is a liar. It is highly doubtful that he really actually wrote a doctoral dissertation. It should have been published in 2003, which is when he says he wrote it, but it wasn't there. It was gone. It appeared when people, journalists, tried to take a closer look at his scientific credentials. That's when all of a sudden this reappeared. And that's when the university at which he says he got his doctorate, the University of Frankfurt, said, oh, we were lucky that he, Drosten, provided them with a copy of the dissertation, which the original of which should have been in their files. So there's nothing truthful about this person. Plus, in 2014, he had given an interview to a German business weekly, Wirtschaftswoche is the name of it, in which he had explicitly said that a positive PCR test doesn't mean a thing. Someone who tests positive may be perfectly healthy. That's why this is such a huge scandal. And that's probably also one of the reasons, I suspect, why your reporting, Jesper, was, well, basically prohibited. I mean, it didn't quite come across as in that manner, but I can't think of, I don't think there's anything personal about it. Makes no sense. Because if it
Reiner,
he could have fired you, and he could have had somebody else write the same story, which was ready to go. Yeah, go ahead, Ulf.
Reiner, I have to give you the smoking gun now. This day I spoke to the press secretary of the social minister in Sweden, Jakob Forssmed. He got the same thing that the Public Health Agency of Sweden, Anders Tegnell, published in 2020, July the 21st. And I will quote what stands in those 14 pages that Anders Tegnell, the big star from Sweden working for the Public Health Agency of Sweden, sat his name under in that 14 pages. And this is the most important part. Who is the smoking gun? I will quote it just a second. This is a quote in that document, signed by Anders Tegnell and pushed out as a guideline to all the 21 regions who is from the taxpayers' money fixing the healthcare system in Sweden. So the guidelines is the smoking gun, published 2020 in 21st of July, sounds like this, quote, the PCR technology used in tests to detect viruses cannot distinguish between viruses that can infect cells and viruses that have been neutralized by the immune system, and therefore these tests cannot be used to determine whether someone is infected or not. Stop quote. This is before the Portugal judgments. You remember, I think it was in November and the beginning of 2021. Before that was published, Anders Tegnell and those guys in this situation have given out those guidelines to the Swedish healthcare system. The government known about it, the prime minister known about it, of course. The people in the situation who is governing the state of Sweden known about this 2020 21st of July in those guidelines that this guy Anders Tegnell published with a lot of other specialists, of course, from Sweden.
How long did he stay in office? Was he still in office when this was published? Could he have acted upon this?
100%. And the thing is, after we have calmed down and the bioweapon injections was spread out, and the fraud was totally because the only solution that this PCR test was for, it was the final solution, those bioweapons, those so-called vaccines. So in Sweden, they are known, well known. The Public Health Agency of Sweden is the specialist in Sweden. Anders Tegnell was the big star. He was in TV, in press conferences, blah, 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 every day, or in the propaganda. And he all the time know about what he has printed, as I quoted just before. What
could he, could he have acted upon it? Was he free to act upon it? Because everybody remembers him for his calm manners and how he refused to introduce mask mandates or vaccine mandates. Could he have acted upon it, or did they maybe put him under pressure as well?
They did put him. They did put him under pressure.
Please
later on.
Björn, wait a minute. The situation 2020, July 21st, was official guidelines with his sign on. This is 100% proof. No doubt about that.
Yeah, but the question is, and that's why I want to hear Björn's answer, was he maybe put under pressure despite the fact that he published this?
The problem is that the Public Health Authority had daily press conferences for a couple of months until the government took over. So they had the government had a press conference at the same time as Anders Tegnell had his press conferences, and that started, I think, in the summer 20. And that meant he was put off the job because he is retired now. He was the face and the person from the authorities in Sweden, which do have very free all the possibilities. So they should advise the government, and they are free to do whatever they want. And that is since 1560 or 1600 something.
Björn, so, a question there, Björn. Are you sure that Anders Tegnell is retired?
Yes. Oh, yes.
When did he got in pension?
Last year somewhere.
Because when I send mails, he takes them out on the official email address, Anders Tegnell, the Public Health Agency of Sweden, just a month or something ago.
Yeah.
But it would be very interesting. It would be very interesting to hear his position. That's the main question here. Is he free to talk, or can he not speak?
The thing is like this. It's not important, because the health minister and his press secretary knows about this. The government knows about it. They got emails about this. I played in this press secretary today and told everything, and it's published since a couple of hours ago on Sweden Under Review, a Rumble channel in Swedish, of course. And this is not a chance in hell that they don't know. The government known before the election 2022, and all of those so-called parties, representants in Sveriges Riksdag, they know about it too, because I have sent it to them.
Well, no, that's not really the question. Everyone involved is going to be held accountable, of course, in every
Yes.
single country. Everyone involved. The question is, do some of them have a viable excuse for, okay. Well, you know, here's the thing. I think roughly at around the same time, maybe a little later, you're talking about July of 2020, I think maybe a little later, the same thing happened in Germany. The person who ran the German equivalent of the American CDC, the RKI, Robert Koch Institute, a guy who is now something important, but of course he's just a puppet, at the WHO, a veterinarian by the name of Wieler. He published an article in which he said exactly the same, that 90%, roughly 90% of all the positive PCR tests are probably false positives. But nobody cared. It seems to me as though something pushes them or something makes them tell the truth, but only after nobody listens to it anymore. So that I don't know, maybe they believe in bad karma or something. Well, I believe in justice. I don't believe in karma. We're going to get them, each and every one of them.
My opinion about Sweden and those guys who are involved there, this is high treason because they know it. This was the plan. The WHO and their terror agenda is so obviously. And Tegnell known about it. He published it in 2020, 24th of July. The government before the election 2022 known about it. The government after the election 2002 and the parliament, they know about it. And this is high treason because they didn't inform the people of Sweden who are paying those taxes so they can eat every day and do their job. They didn't tell them in those press conferences, but Anders Tegnell printed in those guidelines to 2021 of July. They did not inform them, but they did with these guidelines inform every 21 of those regions who was getting 1,500 Swedish crown per PCR test fraud to frighten the people. So it's so obviously that they know. And those PCR tests in Sweden, it has cost the taxpayers 26 to 30 billion Swedish crowns.
Yeah.
And they know it.
That's what it boils down to ultimately. It was not just withholding this information, it was out there, but it was lying about it. Because when they were talking about cases and how urgent it was to get the vaccines ready for the population, they were lying because there were no cases. These cases were a big pack of lies, and they had created them intentionally by intentionally misusing the PCR test. It still remains the heart of the matter. Of course, you can always talk about whether or not there are viruses. I will not do this in the upcoming cases that I'm going to be a part of, because at this point, I don't think it makes any sense. But it is very easy. It is very easy, and we have all the experts on board to explain how the PCR test was deliberately misused in order to create cases that didn't exist, in order to drive people into so-called vaccinations that are potentially deadly. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Björn.
Yeah, there is one thing more with the PCR test. By using statistics, ordinary statistic formulas, you can tell that 2 out of 3 positive PCR tests are false positive PCR tests. Just because when there is about 7% positive of all the tests there were taken, then the sensitivity and specificity is not 100%. So they are a little lower.
Yeah.
And that means if you put those figures in the standard statistical formula for calculating how many false positive and how many false negatives, you find that 67% of the positive tests are false positive. That means that 2 out of 3 are false positive.
Mhm.
But which of the 3 is true positive? That we don't know.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I wrote about that in, let's see, December 18, 2020.
Yeah, and we
In
did
my
an
blog,
interview.
my blog.
And we did an interview back then, Björn, where we explained what was going on with the PCR tests and everything.
Yeah.
And also, we need to remember that the amount of cycles, PCR cycles, are very important when we look at the amount of false positives that we can see. And very many laboratories, at least in Sweden, they had at least 40 cycles, 40 to
Yes.
45 cycles, PCR cycles. And to
They
explain
changed. Yeah.
and to
they
explain what a
changed
cycle
that.
is, it's when you have the DNA, it's like a double helix, and you need to heat the molecules to get it to separate in order to being able to amplify the sequences. And you do that by heating and lowering the temperature, by then adding more energy so that these 2 helixes will go apart. And a lot of this, as I said, laboratories in Sweden and all over the world, they had at least 40 cycles, and it was recommended not to have more than 25 in order to have a reliable result.
Yeah.
But this was also completely ignored. And as you said before, with Drosten and his background and the doubts around his education level and everything, I mean, this is a smoking gun that the media is in on this.
Yeah.
They haven't reported on it. They haven't reported on the amounts of cycles, on the false positives. You only see reports about this in the free press. I mean, those who are not controlled by the media. Sorry, the government and
exactly. This is a major aspect that we didn't even talk about yet. Regardless of the fact that a PCR test can under no circumstances tell us anything about infections because it can't distinguish between dead and live matter. It never finds a whole virus, but a whole virus is needed for an infection. They deliberately ramped up the cycles of amplification way beyond 24, which is the cutoff point at which most scientists say, yeah, it still makes sense for scientific purposes, not for diagnostic purposes. They went up to 35 cycles of amplification, which, as Dr. Mike Eden told us, guarantees you roughly 94% false positives. And they went far beyond it to 40 cycles of amplification, and the gold standard, obviously, as defined by this crook Drosten at the behest of the WHO, was 45 cycles of amplification. So what do you expect? There is absolutely no factual basis for any of the measures, because the only basis was the cases, and the cases were defined by way of misusing a PCR test. That's what
Rainer,
Just look here.
Rainer,
Yeah.
have you seen that article published the 17th of September 2023, who says that 17 million people have been killed by COVID-19 injections? It's a study, and it's published.
Yeah, well, Dr. Roger Hodkinson, he is a pathologist, but also himself a PCR test maker and very outspoken. A few months earlier, came up with the figure of 20 million people who were killed as a result of the so-called vaccinations. So somewhere in that neighborhood, we will probably find the true figure, except that at this point in time, we can only see the very tip of the iceberg. There's much more to come.
This study, this study of 17 million people have been killed by COVID-19 injections. It's only about the southward, and it was published the 17th of September 2023, and it's a study who tells the truth.
Yeah. Björn, you were going to say something.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Just look at the figures that they have been publishing.
Yeah.
If you see here, this is the first season. Mortality is black. PCR test is red, and ICU is yellow.
Yeah.
So the first one peaked at 100 or 99 fatalities at the peak per day. The second peak increased, but what happened at that arrow? Well, they changed the PCR technology. So they amplified not 30, 35. They changed method and amplified 45 to 50 cycles. So what happens was that the PCR positive went up again, but not the mortality as can be seen here.
Yeah.
But this is at the peak here. We started injecting people in Sweden. So this is a delay, some kind of extra mortality, which is not seen during the first peak, but you can see it in the second peak here. And usually the third peak, third season should be almost nothing.
Yeah.
And fourth season, there shouldn't be many cases at all. And another interesting thing is this peak is about 6,000 people who died during the first season. The second, 9,000. The third, 5,200. And the fourth is 5,700. So it's almost the same number of people that died fourth season compared to the first season.
What date is the first season?
The first season is from September 1st, 2019 to August 31st, 2020. So as we in the Northern Hemisphere, we always have the seasons from September to end of August.
When not enough vitamin D is produced because there's not enough sunshine.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so what this boils down to, as you said, Jesper, that the media is in on it. Well, what do we make of Sweb TV in this respect? Are they really a part of the cabal, or is this just an accident?
Well, I don't think it's an accident that my productions didn't get out to the audience. That's a decision that was made, obviously. Speaking about Sweb TV overall, I mean, people have to make their own judgment about this. I can't say either way because, as I mentioned before, it might have been some personal issues in this story as well. But however, I think that if I was in the position of deciding whether or not things would be published or not, I would have published them because it would have benefited the channel and it would have benefited the audience, the Swedish audience. Because what we're having now is we are soon heading like 4 years after this whole pandemic started. I mean, we're 3.5 years on now. And I think that anything that could put an end to this horrible story would be good to get out to the audience. So it's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
I can tell you, Reiner,
Mm-hmm.
that the Sweb television, Michael, what's his after name?
Vilgert.
Michael Wilgert. He
Mm-hmm.
got the same information that the Public Health Agency of Sweden has published 2020, 21st of July. A lot of mail to them, but they give a shit about it. They don't lift it up. He interviewed the parliament representative Elsa Widding about this. They didn't mention it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Elsa Widding had a symposium hearing in the Swedish parliament last Friday, I think it was.
Yes.
They didn't took it up.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Björn was there. Is that correct, Björn? Nothing.
Yes, I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't take up the PCR test fraud.
No.
Mm-hmm. Well, we will, and those of us who are going for the merits of the case, those lawyers who are wanting to get the whole story out, they will continue to focus on the PCR test, because it is important that the people understand the whole story. It is not important the minor victories that we won along the way. They're important in one sense, but they're not really important because they're also a distraction from the fact that there was never a dangerous novel coronavirus and that there was never a pandemic. Yes, if you want to stay inside the system, you can stick with their narrative and simply attack the appropriateness of the measures or the fact that maybe they should have tested the vaccines more. But the merits of the case is there has never been a pandemic. That's what we have to take a very close look at. And that is how the PCR test comes in, because without the PCR test, by the way, this is something that even Drosten admitted. Without the PCR test, nobody would have noticed anything. This would have just been another flu season, nothing else. That's it. So that's why it's so important to get the story out.
How do you think the future is in the process you are in this situation, Reiner?
I think that despite the fact that a lot of people continue to do these either presentations on how the vaccine is not a vaccine and how there's self-assembling whatever shit in there, and how there's graphene oxide in there. It is relevant, but it is not the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is that this is an engineered pandemic. And I do think, and I do believe that those of us who really want to go and get, I'm a tort lawyer, I'm all for damages, who really want to get damages, which means we're going to have to take down all of these corporations, all of them. The medical corporations, Pfizer, BioNTech, but also the technical corporations, those who are involved in the PCR testing, but also the financial corporations. We'll have to take them all down. And in order to do that, we have to focus on the PCR test. It is okay to think about and to debate whether or not there are viruses, but it is more important because it's easier to prove that the PCR test was deliberately misused in order to create cases that didn't exist. Without the PCR test, this would have just been another flu season. That's it.
So, in what you're telling me now and us together, the same thing you first get out with when you started this is the same thing who is the most important whole this journey. Is that correct?
Yes, and all the experts are in agreement on this one. It is not just Dr. Sonja Pekova, it is not just Dr. Mike Yeadon, it is not just Professor Capel or Cahill or Klaus Stelter. It's everyone. It's everyone. It is even Drosten and it is even Fauci who admitted as much. But then they forgot about it, or they pretended to have forgotten about it. Well, we haven't forgotten, and we will not forget.
And we have to add to that list the Public Health Agency of Sweden,
Yeah.
Anders Tegnell, printed it out in the guidelines and sent it out to all the 21 regions in Sweden that we thought Sweden was a democracy, but Sweden is a fascism country and we don't have any democracy anymore.
Well, that's a problem in pretty much all of our Western-dominated countries. It looks as though if we don't rise up, but we will, if we don't rise up, that's the little bits and pieces that are left of our democracy will be swept aside in favor of a totalitarianism, fascism that none of us wants. That's why it's important to rise up, and that's why it's important to take them all to account, because without justice, there cannot be peace.
Well said.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you very much. This is especially important for the Swedish public, but it is also important for the rest of the world, because upon closer inspection, it'll become very clear that something very, very similar has been happening everywhere because of the mainstream media having been bought by those who are behind this. So we must now pull away the curtain so that pretty much everyone can see what is really going on, and no one agrees to another one of these injections. None whatsoever. Thank you very much for taking the time and answering all these questions, Jesper and Björn and Ulf. I'm pretty sure that a lot of people will be very interested in seeing this.
Thank you very much, Reiner, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I will stop the recording now.
Thank you.